I live in a stone mansion called Windermere, a suburb of Greenwich, Connecticut. That night, my husband locked me in the snow, believing the house behind him was his. The guests laughing through the windows were his guests, and the lady sitting in my chair would soon be its new mistress. He was wrong about all three. The party was advertised as a celebration of our 12th anniversary. But by 9 p.m., it looked more like Adrian's coronation. 200 candles burned on the walls of the dining room. A string quartet played in the carved oak porch. Snowflakes drifted past the windows like a thick, silvery veil, turning the garden into a white wonderland. Nearly 100 guests were from Adrian's investment circle, his family, the local real estate industry, and his favorite private clubs, where he spent more time than with me. At the head of the table was the chair my mother used to sit in every Christmas. It was a high-backed walnut chair with hand-carved roses on its frame. I never called it a throne, but my whole family understood it was more than just a piece of furniture. It was where my mother entertained guests, mediated disputes, and made even the most tense guests feel at home. That evening, Lydia Weir sat there. She wore a white winter dress, a diamond necklace, and a satisfied expression on her face, as if she knew the ending before anyone else had even read the last page. One hand rested on the armrest of her mother's chair. The other held a glass of champagne. Adrian stood behind her, his hand on her bare shoulder. My place card had been moved to the far end of the table, next to the service door. I was silent for a few seconds. I saw Adrian's sister suppress a laugh. I saw his mother raise her glass to Lydia, as if offering a private toast. I watched the guests closest to them pretending to admire the bouquets. They knew perfectly well what they were seeing. They just hadn't decided which was more entertaining, cruelty or decorum. I said, "Lydia, that's my music seat." She glanced at the ivory card in front of her. My name was crossed out in blue ink. Her name was written in Adrian's handwriting. "Adrian, let me sit here," she replied. He said the evening's event needed someone who knew how to host. A few people laughed. Adrian didn't seem embarrassed. He seemed glad Lydia had spoken first. He said, "Victoria, don't start. I won't stir up any trouble. Please ask your guest to leave my mother's chair." Lydia raised her champagne to her lips. "It's a chair. It's in my house too." At that moment, Adrian's face changed. 4 months. Whenever I questioned him in public, he had trained himself to smile. He used a smile to hide the truth, just as other men use a smile to hide a locked door. It told everyone I was emotional. He was patient. And everything that followed was my fault. But the words "my house" touched his deepest, most sensitive emotions. "Our house." He corrected his mistake. I met his gaze. "Then you should know better than to humiliate your wife in this setting." The quartet played poorly. The violinist put down his bow. The conversation around the table gradually faded, eventually ending in silence. Lydia slowly rose, but didn't relinquish her chair. She moved closer to Adrian and took his arm. "You see," she said, "this is exactly what I warned you about. She won't tolerate anyone taking advantage of her." I could have told everyone everything I knew. I could have announced that Lydia had drafted a private listing for Windermere Estate, complete with photos of me visiting my father. I could have revealed that Adrian had presented a forged power of attorney to the bank 3 weeks ago, attempting to mortgage the estate to a luxury development project that existed only in architectural renderings and investor promises. I could have described their text messages, discussing which rooms Lydia would renovate after I was dealt with. But instead, I said, "Get up from your chair." Adrian took 3 steps between us. His fingers gripped my upper arm tightly, the pain shooting to my wrist. The closest guests took a step back. No one intervened. He pulled me away from the table. I braced myself against the carpet with my heel, but he gripped me tighter. "You've got enough attention," he whispered. "You're hurting me." "Fine. Maybe pain will teach you when to stop." He dragged me across the dining room. The 4 of us fell silent. All eyes were on us. Someone raised their phone. Then someone else did. The scene seemed to have its own eerie rhythm. Adrian's father chuckled softly. His mother said, "Victoria, really? Does everything have to be an act?" Lydia remained standing beside my mother's chair, sipping champagne, as if everything in the room was finally set up. Adrian pulled me through the hall, past the flower-adorned staircase and my mother's portrait. As we reached the front door, my shoes slipped on the marble floor. I grabbed the edge of a side table for balance. He flung my hand away. "Let go of me. You should have left when I told you to." You made me leave my own anniversary party. I'll say it again. He opened the front door. The wind whipped snowflakes across the threshold, scattering them on the polished floor. The biting wind almost suffocated me. Adrian hesitated for a second. Not because he regretted what he was doing. He was doing it. He was calculating whether the guests would think him decisive or cold-blooded. Lydia called from the dining room. Go ahead, Adrian. She'll only ruin the rest of the night. That made him decide. He shoved me. My heel caught on the stone threshold. I fell down the steps, kneeling, and slid into the snow beside the frozen fountain. The cold immediately seeped into my skirt. I heard laughter coming from inside. Not everyone was laughing, but it was enough. Adrian walked onto the porch, lifted my coat, and pointed to the door. Go to a hotel. Come back when you can act like an adult. With that, he closed the door. The lock turned. Through the tall windows, I could see the restaurant. Lydia returned to my chair, raising her champagne glass. Adrian's mother leaned towards her, smiling. Behind them, the guests began to chatter again, with a strange urgency, as if relieved that cruelty had chosen someone else. I didn't knock, didn't call for staff, and didn't crawl around in the snow to prove that woman. The person inside had already taken my place. I put on my coat, my hands trembling so badly that I couldn't even button the first button. Then I reached into the small pocket inside my skirt and pulled out my phone. There were 3 unread messages from my father. The first was, is he really going to do this? The second was, the bank has confirmed that the signature is forged. The third was, give me the order. I dialed his number. He answered before it even rang. Victorian snow fell on my hair and melted on my cheeks. I watched through the window as Adrian poured champagne for Lydia under my mother's crystal chandelier. Dad, I said, bring the files. My father didn't ask what had happened. Just said, 10 minutes. Then the call ended. I stood in the snow, looking at the driveway. At first, there was only darkness outside the iron gate. 9 minutes later, white headlights appeared among the trees. 2 became 4, then 8. The gate opened, and the people inside didn't touch anything. Everything was ready. A convoy of black vehicles drove into the yard. Tires rolled over the thick snow, leaving neat, parallel tracks. The first car was my father's armored sedan. Behind it were 2 SUVs, a bank car, and a dark van belonging to the team that had been documenting Adrian's supposedly undetected group for the past month. Someone inside had seen the convoy. The music stopped for the second time. Adrian ran to the door, opened it, and wore that bright, slightly desperate smile that always appeared on his face whenever someone richer than him entered. He didn't look at me first, but looked past me at the approaching vehicles. Graham, he called out, opening his arms as if welcoming a beloved family member. What a wonderful surprise. My father stepped out of the car. Graham Ashford, 71, with graying hair and moving more slowly than before, showed no signs of weakness. He wore a black overcoat over a dark suit. Our family lawyer followed behind him, carrying a leather file bag. The chief risk officer of North Atlantic Bank emerged from the second car. The auditors followed behind the convoy. A woman from the county property fraud investigation team closed the door of a van and stared directly at Adrian. His smile faded. My father stopped beside me. He saw the snow on my skirt, the deepening bruises under Adrian's fingerprints, and the blood from my knee hitting a stone. He didn't ask if I was all right. He knew I wasn't. He turned to Adrian and asked softly, why? My daughter standing outside her own door? Adrian's gaze moved from my father to the lawyer, then to the bank clerk and the investigators behind them. It's a misunderstanding, he said. Victoria is emotional. We just wanted to calm her down. I stepped onto the porch. No, I said. You dragged me out, threw me in the snow, and then locked the door. The guests gathered behind Adrian, their faces reflected in the windows and the open hall. Lydia stood behind them, just in my mother's line of sight, holding a champagne glass, though her hand was a little unsteady. Adrian lowered his voice and said, Victoria, we can talk about this privately. Once you made it public, that option disappeared. I looked at my father, then at the briefcase in the lawyer's hand. Open the door, I said. Everyone who witnessed him driving me away should hear why he no longer had the right to expel anyone. The winter wind blew through the hall. Adrian was still standing in the doorway, blocking my way. My father didn't raise his voice. Get out of the way, he said. That night, Adrian obeyed for the first time. 36 hours earlier, I had sat alone in the small morning room in Windermere, my forged signature flashing on the laptop screen. The room faced east, receiving the first rays of sunlight over the frozen lake. My mother had used it for correspondence. She kept blue stationery in the top drawer, writing thank you notes in ink, and believed that a person's character could be measured by how he behaved when no one was watching. After she died, I kept the room almost exactly as she left it. Adrian called it too sentimental. Lydia called it dead woman's decoration in a message I later retrieved. I hadn't intended to look at their messages. I had intended to check a routine notification from the North Atlantic Bank. The notification, in an ordinary envelope, was sent to the Ashford Family Residential Trust. It requested confirmation of a proposed credit arrangement secured by Windermere and mentioned a power of attorney I had signed 4 days earlier. I hadn't signed anything. The proposed loan amount was $18 million. The borrower was Aldervale Development Group, a company founded 7 months earlier by Adrian and Lydia. The project description promised the construction of a private alpine club in Vermont with 24 villas, a spa, a helipad, and guaranteed access to an elite international network of members. The bank documents described Windermere as Adrian's unsecured marital residence and designated him as the trustee under the power of attorney. My name was on the power of attorney. From a distance, the signature looked very real. Up close, the surface was too smooth. The person who copied it had forged the version on our marriage certificate, including the small upward-pointing ring I hadn't used since my mother's death. I called the bank from the lounge. She immediately became cautious after I told the lady in the trust services department that the document was forged. She asked me to verify my identity and then transferred me to the risk management department. Within an hour, the loan was frozen. By noon, the bank's chief risk officer had sent a secure copy of the application to my father's lawyer. I could have confronted Adrian immediately. 12 years ago, I would have walked into his office, produced the forged authorization letter, and demanded the truth. He would have denied it, downplayed it, and finally only admitted the smallest part one could prove. He would have called it a misunderstanding. He might have blamed the junior lawyer, the automated forms, or my miscommunication. By the end of the conversation, I would probably have apologized for not trusting him. It took me years to realize this cycle. So, I didn't confront him. I called my father. Don't touch anything else, he said after I explained. Don't forward the documents to your personal email. Don't tell Adrian it was the bank that contacted you. You think there's more? I don't think someone would forge a trustee's signature for $18 million unless he told some small lies beforehand. My father wasn't a detective. He grew Ashford Realty Holdings from a regional construction company into a behemoth with apartment buildings, logistics centers, hospitals, and hotels. He was a master of paperwork because it was the cornerstone of his world. He also knew Adrian because he had distrusted him since the first year of our marriage. I mistakenly thought his distrust was class prejudice. Adrian wasn't from a poor background. His family was wealthy, but they had fallen on hard times, developed some bad habits, and couldn't afford to maintain them anymore. They still kept their club memberships, rented limousines, and treated every dinner party as an audition for a life they could no longer afford. When I met him at a heritage conservation fundraising event, he was charming, considerate, and, remarkably, completely unconcerned about my father's reputation. He said he wanted to build his business from scratch, without relying on inherited advantages. I trusted him because I wanted to believe that choosing him proved I was more than just an heir. The truth was, it turned out Adrian wasn't entirely uninterested in inheritance. He had been researching it all along. Windermere Estate became the center of this misunderstanding. This estate had been passed down through 4 generations in my mother's family. It wasn't the largest property in the Ashford family, but it was the only place I felt truly at home. My mother, Eleanor, inherited it from her aunt, before her last surgery. She transferred the estate to a protected family trust. The terms were simple. I had the sole beneficial right. My spouse could reside there during the marriage. Neither of us could mortgage, sell, divide, or make any material alteration to the property without the written approval of the trustees' committee. Any fraud, violence, or attempt at unauthorized transfer would automatically terminate the spouse's right of residence. My father served as chairman of the trustees' committee, with 2 other members being independent lawyers. Before we moved in, Adrian received a complete copy of the trust agreement. He attended a meeting where every restriction was explained in detail. He signed every page. But he never actually read the documents. I knew this because he joked about it afterward. A full 40 pages. He said. Your father wants another key. With that, he tossed the agreement onto the kitchen counter. Lawyers make their fortunes by turning common sense into theoretical arguments. At first, his carelessness seemed harmless. Later, it turned into a sense of entitlement. He started referring to Wintermere as my estate at parties. He commissioned a family crest to be designed and decorated the gate with his surname. He told magazines that he had restored the property, even though the restoration work had been managed and paid for by my mother's trust for years before his arrival. Once, a reporter asked him if the property belonged to my family, and Adrian laughed and replied, "Marriage is a merger." I corrected him privately. He kissed my forehead and said, "You're too concerned with the technical details." It is these technical details that have prevented him from possessing everything he claims to have. After the bank called, my father sent 2 men to Wintermere under a plausible pretext. One was the trust's property manager, to check on the heating. The other was a digital forensics consultant, as part of the security company's routine winter maintenance. Neither of them spoke to me. Adrian. They both photocopied the documents they were legally entitled to access. By evening, we knew that the forged power of attorney was not an isolated incident. Adrian had submitted a draft deed transferring Wintermere estate from the family trust to a newly formed marriage holding company. This deed was not registered because the county clerk's verification system flagged the trustee's information. Lydia prepared a confidential sales memo, describing the property as a prime opportunity for a private transaction. She photographed the bedrooms, wine cellar, library, stables, and my mother's private jewelry room. She entered the property information into a database accessible only to brokers. Using a code name, the proposed asking price was $42 million. Their plan wasn't just to mortgage the property. They planned to secure the loan first, use some of it to launch a project in Vermont, and then arrange a private sale before the trust discovered the transfer of ownership. Adrian intended to tell me later that financial necessity had forced him to do so. Lydia, on the other hand, hoped to receive a 7-figure commission after my divorce and then move into Wintermere estate. These messages were heartbreaking because they were so pragmatic. There were no declarations of forbidden love, no poetry, no anguish. Lydia wrote, "The West Suite should be ours as soon as V gets out of jail. The Lakeview photos would look better without her mother's furniture." Adrian replied, "You can do whatever you want with the furniture." She would disappear with the sentimental items. In another post, Lydia asked me if I would object to the deal. Adrian replied, "She'll give in once the pressure is public. That's why anniversary parties are so important." That sentence completely changed everything. This winter anniversary party was Adrian's idea. He insisted on inviting investors, brokers, family, friends, and several people connected to the Vermont project. He said the event would reassure them that our marriage was strong and our family stable. I had initially thought he just wanted photos. Now I understood. He wanted witnesses. If he could provoke me, make me lose my temper, kick me out of the party, and then later claim I was emotionally unstable, he could corroborate my lie about voluntarily authorizing him financially. Lydia had prepared talking points for the guests who might be interviewed in future litigation. I read the message twice. Then I closed my laptop and went to the window. Snow began to fall on the lake. In the reflection, I saw my mother's desk behind me, and my own face reflected in the dark glass. My first instinct was to cancel the party. My second instinct was to convince Adrian that his plan had worked. I called the trust lawyer, Carolyn Shaw. She had known me since. He was 13 then, and he had a disturbing ability to make silence sound like a problem. We could terminate his residency tonight. She said that after reviewing the evidence, the mere act of attempting to take out a mortgage was sufficient to take action under Section 11. Would this reveal Lydia's role? Not necessarily. Would this preserve evidence for the bank? Yes. Would this show investors that he built this project through fraud? Only when it's public. I looked at Adrian's information about the pressure to go public. He chose the anniversary party because he wanted others to see it. I said, maybe he should. Caroline was silent for a long time. What's your suggestion? Let the party go on. The bank has completed its internal review. The county investigator confirmed the forged document. Security measures ensure every camera angle is protected. We're prepared to terminate the contract. but we won't issue it until Adrian takes action. There are risks involved. I know. Personal risks. I glanced down at the faint yellow bruise near my elbow from last week. Adrian had grabbed me during an argument about Lydia's late-night phone call. He apologized the next morning and sent flowers to my locker room. The card read, "We both need to be gentler." He'd started escalating things. I said, "If I cancel the party, he'll move the documents and say I misunderstood. If I confront him privately, Lydia will destroy her documents. Tomorrow night, we'll see the bank representative, the broker's records, the guests he invited, and the home security footage. And what will all this give you? To see the truth in one room?" Caroline sighed. "I'll be prepared for anything. Your father will definitely hate this plan." My father hated anything that wasn't his own design. He might still be right. He could have been waiting nearby. That's why the convoy arrived a 10-minute drive away on party night. It wasn't magic. It was preparation. My father, lawyers, bank clerks, and investigators gathered at a conference center owned by Ashford, 3 miles from Windermere. They had the original trust agreement, the rejected mortgage application, the forged power of attorney, the draft sales listing, the broker's communications with Ruwatchings and his ADN editor, and a temporary injunction covering Adrian's electronic devices. They had been waiting for my call. I told them I would call if Adrian tried to evict me from the property, destroy the evidence, or make a false claim to ownership in front of witnesses. I didn't expect him to throw me out in the snow, but by then, the documents were already on their way. When I returned to Windermere, the rooms didn't feel any warmer. The fire in the hall was still burning. The champagne was still sparkling in the crystal glasses. The air still carried the scents of pine, beeswax, and roasted rosemary from the kitchen, but the house had changed. Because the balance of knowledge had shifted. 10 minutes earlier, Adrian had assumed everyone present knew the crucial facts. He was the boss. I was an emotionally unstable wife. Lydia was the ideal replacement. My father was an aging businessman whose influence was limited to his properties. Now, a lawyer was presenting his case in the center of the hall. Caroline Shaw took out 3 folders and placed them on the long entrance table. She didn't look stunning. She wore a navy blue coat, flats, and reading glasses. Her calmness unsettled Adrian more than anger. "Before you all leave," she said, "I need to state that this residence is believed to contain certain materials related to an ongoing investigation into property fraud. No guests are currently in custody. However, anyone carrying documents, equipment, jewelry, or other items that do not belong to them should place them on the table for identification." A tense murmur rippled through the crowd. Adrian laughed too loudly. "This is absurd. Caroline, you've trespassed on my property." She opened the first folder. "Ownership of Windermere Estate belongs to the Eleanor Ashford Residential Trust. Victoria Ashford is the sole beneficiary. You obtained a conditional residency permit through marriage. You do not have ownership, beneficial rights, trusteeship rights, sale rights, or loan rights." Adrian's mother emerged from the dining room. Celeste Mercer, in an emerald velvet gown, was adorned with diamonds that were impossible to conceal. "This is impossible," she said. "Adrian has lived here for 12 years. Caroline looked at her through her glasses. "Residency is not the same as ownership. He has maintained the property. The trust has paid for all structural maintenance, taxes, insurance, staffing, and capital improvements." Adrian turned to me. "You told me this was our house. During our marriage, I told you this was our home. And you think those words equate to ownership?" My father was still standing near the door. It's important that he didn't go to the center of the room. In Adrian's stories about my family, my father always appeared as a controlling tyrant. But tonight, he was standing there. "Because these documents belong to me. The decision is mine. And the voice Adrian is trying to suppress is my voice." Caroline took a thick beige document from the folder. "This is the trust agreement you signed 11 years and 8 months ago," she said. "Your initials appear on every page. The last page has your notarized signature." She handed the document to Adrian. Adrian didn't take it. "I was told these were just routine check-in documents. You had independent legal representation at the time." My lawyer barely explained anything. "Your lawyer submitted a written statement claiming he explained every restriction." Adrian looked around, as if someone would agree that the documents were unfair and thus extricate him from the situation. But no one did. Several investors associated with the Aldwell development had distanced themselves from his family and gone to the bank representatives. The chief risk officer introduced himself as Daniel Joe. Mr. Mercer, he said. North Atlantic Bank received an application to use Wintermere as collateral for an $18 million loan. The application includes a power of attorney allegedly signed by Mrs. Bowes, a letter of attestation from Ashford, and a letter of attestation allegedly signed by Ms. Planet Shaw. Caroline turned to the second page. I didn't sign this. Daniel looked at me. Mrs. Ashford confirmed that she did not sign this power of attorney. Our documentation team found several irregularities. We suspended the application and handed the documents over to the anti-fraud department. Adrian's father, Roland, came over. Unlike Celeste, he looked more frightened than angry. He had invested heavily in the Vermont project and convinced several friends to do the same. Adrian, he said, tell them it's an administrative error. Adrian's gaze shifted to Lydia. She was no longer in my mother's chair. Sometime during Caroline's explanation, Lydia had quietly slipped into the side corridor leading to the service staircase. Her champagne glass lay abandoned on the table. The diamond clasp around her neck was missing. She clutched a beige leather briefcase tightly to her ribs. I saw her first, Lydia said. She stopped. Everyone turned to look. I need some fresh air, she replied. The back door is in the kitchen. You're heading towards my mother's private room. I'm looking for the bathroom. You've been here 6 times. You know where the bathroom is. Lydia smiled. But there was no warmth in her smile. Victoria, this is shameful. For you. For everyone. She took another step forward. County investigator. Mara Ellis stepped into the hallway before Lydia reached the stairs. Please return to the lobby, Mara said. You can't leave me here. I didn't leave you here. I asked if the folder you're holding contains documents belonging to Alderville Development, the Wintermere property list, or the Ashford Trust. They're my personal documents. Put them on the table and check. Lydia gripped the folder tighter. Adrian interjected. She's my business partner. Those documents are privileged documents. Caroline answered without turning her head. Property listing materials are not protected by marital privilege. And Ms. Wells isn't your lawyer. Lydia's eyes met Adrian's. Something seemed to brush past them. It wasn't affection, but calculation. Both were weighing whether the other still held any value. Just then, the security panel beeped. Mrs. Alvarez, the estate manager, walked in from the staff corridor with a tablet. She had worked at Wintermere Estate since my mother was alive. Adrian often ignored her, so he had forgotten she had access to the security files. Mrs. Alvarez said to me, the front door camera is ready. Adrian's demeanor changed. What camera? Madam? Daughter? Alvarez connected the tablet to the monitor in the hall. The screen above the fireplace had been playing a slideshow of anniversary photos. Our wedding photos were gone, replaced by a wide-angle shot of the front door steps recorded 12 minutes earlier. Everyone watched Adrian drag me through the door. They heard me say, "You're hurting me." They heard Lydia shout, "Go ahead." They saw Adrian shove me onto the stone steps. They heard laughter from inside. They saw a coat fall beside me. And the door closed. The video played for a while longer. 5 seconds. The camera caught Adrian turning the latch, saying, "She'll come back when she remembers who paid the price for her." No one laughed now. Celeste stared at the floor. Roland looked older than when he arrived. One of Adrian's college friends put down his phone, which he was using to record a document reading. Another guest quietly moved away from Adrian, as if violence were contagious. Adrian pointed at the screen and said, "She slipped." The lie was so quick that several people gasped. "You all saw it," he insisted. "She broke free from my embrace. I opened the door because she asked to leave. The camera angle makes it look worse." Mrs. Alvarez replayed the recording. This time, I could hear the sound of his hand hitting my shoulder as he shoved me. Adrian's face was flushed. "Turn it off." I looked at Mrs. Alvarez. Pause after the door locks. Through the glass. The image froze on Adrian's face. He was smiling at the people inside. I turned to him. "You intend to portray me as mentally unstable. You invited investors to observe. You moved my seat for Lydia and waited for me to explode. When I didn't act the way you planned. You used force. That's your interpretation." "No. The camera footage is the interpretation you can't alter." My father finally spoke. "Caroline. Read Article 11. She opened the trust agreement, found a page, and marked it. Article 11. Section C. States that any spouse, common law partner, licensee, or visitor who commits physical violence against a beneficiary of the trust property, intentionally excludes a beneficiary from the residence, attempts to acquire ownership through false statements, or uses the property for fraud, will immediately and permanently forfeit all residency rights. In emergencies, notice may be given verbally and confirmed in writing. She looked at Adrian. Mr. Mercer, your residency permit in Windermere is terminated tonight. A breath seemed to be caught in the air. Adrian smiled again. But the smile was weak. You can't kick me out in the dead of winter. This isn't an eviction between landlord and tenant, Caroline said. You're not a tenant. Your residency permit has been revoked under a private trust agreement you signed with your lawyer. I have the right to marry. You can file any legal claim through family court. You can't stay in this house tonight. He looked at my father. You let her do this? My father's expression didn't change. I suggested she kick you out months ago. She chose to investigate first. Adrian turned to me, his face showing genuine surprise. He thought I would deny it, perhaps to soften my father's tone. But I didn't. Daniel Joe opened his folder. There's another problem, he said. The bank application lists the expected deposits for tonight's anniversary celebration as proof of investors' commitment to the Alderville development. There will be several transfers to process tomorrow morning. The guests immediately began to speak. Which deposits? I was told it was just a reservation. He scoffed, said the escrow funds were refundable. I never authorized any collateral. Daniel held up a hand. If you sign a letter of intent or make a transfer, our team will provide you with secure contact information before you leave. Do not transfer funds. The bank has frozen all accounts directly related to this application pending review. Roland turned pale. How many are frozen? Daniel looked at Adrian. Not Roland. That information will be provided to the authorized account holders. Adrian walked toward me. You sabotaged the project. I didn't touch it. You tried to pay for it with a property you didn't own. It could have made us hundreds of millions of dollars. So why forge a signature? Because you would refuse. That's what ownership is all about. For years, Adrian had accused me of being cowardly, homebody, and overly cautious. He saw every boundary as evidence of my lack of foresight. Standing in the hall, I finally saw clearly his ambitious blueprint. He believed the risks shouldn't be shared. He believed the consequences should be borne by others. Lydia suddenly placed the portfolio on the front desk. There, she said. I'm leaving now. Mara Ellis opened it. The first item was a confidential brokerage agreement granting Lydia exclusive rights to sell Windermere Estate. The second part was a set of enlarged interior photographs. The third was a roll of velvet jewelry. Mrs. Alvarez instinctively covered her mouth. Mara unrolled the scroll. Inside were my mother's sapphire earrings, a diamond bracelet, 2 antique brooches, and a small gold pendant containing a photograph of my parents' wedding day. Lydia took a step back. I was protecting those people. Who did I ask? Chaos tonight. They're locked in a private locker upstairs. Adrian handed them to me. All eyes turned to him. Adrian said nothing. Lydia continued walking quickly. He said these were marital property. He told me that Victoria had agreed to sell some properties to fund the development project. I never agreed. You can't prove that. Mrs. Alvarez tapped her tablet. The jewelry room cameras record comings and goings, she said. At 6:42 p.m. tonight, Mr. Mercer used Mrs. Ashford's emergency key to open the cabinet. Ms. Wall went in with him. Lydia closed her eyes. Adrian muttered a curse. Mara placed the jewelry roll next to the file. Ms. Weil, I strongly suggest you keep your contacts open to answer questions. I need a lawyer. That's your right. I have nothing else to say. Perhaps this is the wise thing to do this time, I said. Guests stood between the dining room and the hall, unsure whether they were witnesses, victims, or accomplices. Outside, black cars idled in the snow. Inside, the flames of the anniversary candles had died down. I could have ordered everyone to leave immediately, but I didn't. Instead, I walked to the center of the hall. No one will be forced into the blizzard, I said. Coffee will be provided in the library. Everyone who invested in Aldervale will receive the bank's contact information. Anyone who records the events can keep the recording and provide a copy to their lawyer. We will provide Adrian's family with transportation and time to pack their coats and necessities. No one may take documents, jewelry, computers, or any items from their private rooms. Celeste stared at me. You did that to us. And you expect us to accept your hospitality? I'm not hospitalizing, I said. I'm stopping anyone from accusing me of treating them the way your son treated me. My father looked at me, and I saw a mixture of sadness and pride in his eyes. Adrian saw something else. He understood that even now, with all the legal advantages and all the witnesses present, I wouldn't become the monster he wanted. This terrified him more than revenge. The library became a waiting room for the consequences. Mrs. Alvarez calmly directed the staff. Wet coats were collected. Coffee, tea, and soup were served without anyone having to ask. The quartet packed up their instruments, gave their names to the investigators, and left through the service corridor. Some guests left immediately upon being told they could. Others stayed because they had invested money, signed letters, or heard Adrian's promises, which now sounded like evidence. This room used to be mine. My grandfather's study. Bookshelves stretched to the ceiling. A ladder extended along a brass railing. My mother had replaced old hunting trophies with paintings by local artists and photographs of the Wintermere Gardens in all 4 seasons. Adrian felt the room was a waste of space. He wanted to turn it into a cigar bar. That night, it became the place where people first spoke the truth. The first investor to approach Daniel Joe was a retired surgeon named Armand. He transferred $400,000 into what Adrian called a protected escrow account. This money represented most of the proceeds from the sale of his clinic. I was told the Ashford family guaranteed the principal, he said. Daniel asked him if there was a written guarantee. Dr. Armand pulled out an email on his phone. The email came from Adrian's account and included a 1-page family asset backing letter with a scanned copy of my father's signature. My father read it only once. I didn't sign this. The doctor's hands began to tremble. The second investor was Adrian's widow. The club had transferred $250,000. A third person signed a credit commitment guaranteed by their company. Lydia told each of them that the Vermont project was privately backed by the Ashford family, and that tonight's party in Wintermere proved it. The house wasn't just collateral. It was a stage. Its stone walls, antique portraits, silverware, servants, and history were all used to create the illusion that a fraudulent project was inevitable. Adrian invited people to dine under my mother's chandelier to mislead them into thinking it was just a right of use, not ownership. That's when I understood why he needed Lydia in my place. She not only replaced me as his partner but also played the role of the future mistress of the estate in front of the investors he wanted to impress. Caroline and Daniel set up a makeshift reception desk. Guests forwarded messages, contracts, and bank confirmations. Mara Ellis photographed the documents and placed the originals in an evidence sleeve. My father contacted the company's external legal team, authorizing them to provide free initial assistance to every client who invested based on false Ashford family information. Assurance. Adrian watched all this from the other end of the room. He wasn't allowed upstairs without accompaniment. His cell phone and laptop were confiscated under a temporary order, though he also carried a spare phone that no one knew about. I noticed the outline of that phone in the inside pocket of his tuxedo as he crossed his arms. I hadn't said anything yet. Celeste and Roland sat by the fireplace. Adrian's sister, Marissa, was no longer pretending to be having fun tonight. She kept watching her husband's expression. He had invested through a company in both their names. Finally, Celeste stood up. Enough of this farce, she said. Victoria, you've made yourself clear. Adrian had made a mistake. Lydia was clearly manipulating him. There's no need to bring shame on the whole family. Lydia, sitting at the other end of the room next to the lawyer's empty chair, chuckled. Manipulating him? Celeste turned to her. You were hired to market this project. You used your position to seduce a married man. I didn't put his hand on my shoulder at dinner. Don't be vulgar. Your son promised me the house. Celeste looked at Adrian. He turned his face away. Lydia leaned forward. He showed me the floor plan. He asked which bedroom I wanted. He told me Victoria would receive a settlement and leave before spring. He said you agreed. That was a lie, Celeste said. Would you like me to play your voicemail? The room fell silent again. After Mara nodded, Lydia picked up her phone from the evidence table. She opened an audio file and pressed play. Celeste's voice echoed in the library. Lydia, darling, I know these are tricky situations. Victoria has never understood Adrian's social or professional needs. We will officially welcome you after the legal transition is complete. This house needs a woman who isn't afraid of people. The recording ended. Celeste's face suddenly sank in. I was trying to maintain peace. No. I said. You were planning my replacement. She turned away, tears welling in her eyes. You've never put in any effort for us. This accusation had worked for years. It didn't need any concrete examples to label every line as a moral failure. I moved closer. I paid for your husband's medical bills because of an insurance dispute that delayed surgery. I paid for Marissa's children's school fees during her bankruptcy. I hosted all the festivals. I let you in and out of the house when your roof was under repair. I kept silent at the club when you introduced Lydia to Adrian's true partner because I didn't want to embarrass you. Celeste's lips tightened. You were in charge of keeping score. I kept the records because your son forged the documents. There's a difference. Roland stood beside her. Victoria. He said. I didn't know about this power of attorney. I believe you. The relief on his face came too quickly. I know Adrian is working hard to raise funds. He continued. He said the trust documents were being updated. And you had agreed in principle. I invested because I believed the family would support the project. You never asked me. He said you weren't keen on talking business. That was another thing Adrian used to say to destroy me. He told people I disliked finance, legal matters, negotiations, conflicts, travel, public speaking, and anything else that might reveal I was more than just the quiet woman beside him. I said I worked in the acquisitions department at Ashford Property Holdings for 9 years. I reviewed more developments than Adrian had completed. Roland blinked. Adrian told us you were in charge of the charity decorating project. On the other side of the room, my father's expression turned serious, but he remained silent. I looked at Adrian. He shrugged. You left the company. I took leave when my mother was sick. You never came back. Because you invited me to help you build your consulting business. And you agreed. Yes. That was my fault. It doesn't mean I don't have a career. The guests heard things differently now. Some only knew me as Adrian's introverted wife. Others accepted his description because it was convenient. The truth didn't make them heroes. It just made their excuses disappear. Marissa spoke from beside the fireplace. You really work in mergers and acquisitions? I led a team to acquire and renovate the port trading area. Her husband stared at me. Was that you? It was a team. I was in charge of that deal. Adrian rolled his eyes. That's irrelevant. This is important. Marissa said. You told us that your relationship with the Ashford family was entirely built through you. Adrian's patience ran out. My relationship with Graham was built through me. He respected my abilities. The father finally left through the door. I tolerated you because Victoria loved you. The verdict was forceful and merciless. Adrian's face tightened. My father continued. Before the marriage, you submitted 3 proposals to my firm. All 3 were rejected due to poor data. After you married my daughter, at her request, I gave your consulting firm 2 small contracts. You missed the deadlines for both. Victoria completed the corrections and asked to have her name removed to avoid embarrassing you. Adrian looked at me as if my silence betrayed him. You told him he already knew. You made me believe that I let you tell your own story. That distinction matters. I didn't contribute to Adrian's arrogance. I didn't interrupt him anymore. Mara Ellis quietly approached me. We've discovered inconsistencies in the portfolio, she said. The property information package mentioned an original appraisal report, a second power of attorney, and a blue-bound due diligence manual. These documents are all missing. Where would Lydia have put them? Lydia heard the question. I didn't. Adrian's gaze flickered towards the service corridor. That's enough. I looked at Mrs. Alvarez. Had anyone been in the East office tonight? She checked the security tablet. At 7:14. The door opened with Mr. Mercer's passcode. It reopened at 9:32. Who used it the second time? The camera was disabled. Adrian's hand reached into the inside pocket of his coat. Mara saw it. Mr. Mercer, please remove your hand slowly. He smiled. I was reaching for a handkerchief. Use the outside pocket. He didn't. My father's security chief, Thomas Reed, stood between Adrian and the hallway. Reed wasn't a bodyguard in the dramatic sense. He was a former FBI agent in his 60s, wearing bifocals and talking like an accountant. Adrian, he said. It's the spare phone. Adrian's face paled instantly. What phone? The one in your left inner pocket. Adrian looked at me. You searched me. No. I said. You touched it every time someone mentioned the missing documents. He pulled out a small black phone and held it up. It's a private business device. Mara handed him an evidence bag. Don't unlock it. Put it in. I don't agree. You don't have to agree to a voluntary surrender. But the restraining order lists everything related to Aldwell. If you refuse, I'll record your refusal and apply for a seizure order. Adrian looked out the window. The tire tracks left by the convoy were covered by snow. Through the glass, the manor was silent. He seemed to understand that running would only make the scene more complete. He put the phone in his bag. Mrs. Alvarez handed me the key to the East office. I didn't give it to my father. I took Caroline, Marta, and Mrs. Alvarez with me. Adrian was allowed to follow at a distance from Reed. We walked through the hall and into the corridor behind the stairs. The East office used to be my mother's greenhouse. Adrian had converted it into a private workspace and installed a lock without the trust's consent. I rarely went in. The walls were covered with development maps. Architectural renderings of the Vermont resort were displayed on easels. A model of a planned clubhouse sat on the central table behind the desk. A cabinet door was open. The blue due diligence manual was missing. So was the initial assessment. A thin trail of melted snow remained on the floor. These footprints didn't lead to the front door. They led to the old passageway behind the bookshelves. Wintermere Estate was built in phases. The earliest sections included service passageways for staff to move around discreetly. Most of them were sealed off during the renovation. One of the doors was behind a bookshelf in the East office, connected to the greenhouse, and then to a side door near the garage. Adrian had discovered it years ago. He used to call it the perfect escape from a dreary dinner. I touched the edge of the bookshelf. The concealed latch was warm. Someone had used it just minutes before the convoy arrived. Marta called the team outside. Mrs. Alvarez checked the garage security footage. She said a car was missing. A gray Range Rover. Who delivered the veil? We found Lydia's portfolio in the library, which meant someone had driven her car. Adrian closed his eyes for half a second. Who has these files? I asked. He opened them. Nobody. I don't know who left through that passage. Well, you wouldn't mind if the main gate cameras caught them. Mara's radio crackled. The security guard at the lower gate reported that the Range Rover had tried to leave 6 minutes earlier. The gate didn't open because the trust had suspended all visitor vehicle access after my call. The driver abandoned the car near the old orchard and walked toward the county road. The officer saw a man carrying a blue case. Adrian's project accountant, Felix Grant, was no longer home. The search for the missing documents turned into a snow chase. Mara wouldn't allow half the guests to turn the search into a game. She closed the East office, assigned an investigator to look into the abandoned Range Rover, and asked estate security to save the gate footage. Thomas Reed took 2 members of my father's team to the orchard, not to chase Felix through the woods, but to stop him from getting there before the local police reached the county road. Adrian immediately objected. Felix is our employee, he said. He may have taken confidential materials for safekeeping. He can explain when he returns the items. Mara replied. He has anxiety. A confrontation with the police could traumatize him. I looked at Adrian. You sent someone out into the blizzard with forged documents. And now you're worried about his safety. I didn't send anyone at all. Your backup phone will answer that question. For the next 20 minutes, no one knew what Felix would do. The uncertainty had a greater impact on the atmosphere than the legal announcement. Those guests who viewed the gathering as a scandal began to realize they might be involved in a serious fraud. Investors called their spouses. Lawyers were woken up. A man sat alone by the library window, calculating on a napkin how much he had lost in his retirement account. I went to the kitchen. I needed to get away from Adrian's voice and the look on my father's face every time he saw the bruises on my arm. Staff gathered near the pantry. Some were worried about losing their jobs. Others had witnessed Adrian's behavior and understood why the conflict had erupted at home. Mrs. Alvarez followed me. I should have told you sooner, she said. About what? Mr. Tyndall? Mercer used the private room. Mrs. Well, came while you were away. The jewelry cabinet. You've logged access. I told myself. That's enough. That's perhaps why we were able to fully recover. She shook her head. Your mother would have spoken sooner. My mother also spent 20 years pretending my grandfather's bad temper was just old-fashioned. Mrs. Alvarez looked surprised. The past becomes elegant when all those who have suffered are too polite to describe it. I said. That's also one of the reasons I don't want to reduce this night to a story of a wealthy father saving his daughter. Money gave me many resources that women don't have. Like lawyers, security files, independent property, a bank that will call back, a father waiting nearby. Yet I still spent years turning control into patience, fear into marital compromise. Wealth doesn't make the abuse of power impossible. It just gives it a better room. The kitchen door opened. My father went in alone. He closed the door behind him and stood across the workbench from me. Without his entourage. He looked older. Snow melted on the shoulders of his coat. You know he grabbed you before. He said. It's not a problem. I looked down at the bruises on my body. Yes. How many times? Twice before tonight. Why didn't you tell me? Because you came in the same way tonight as always. That was wrong. This should have been your decision. He gritted his teeth. He put his hand on you. And I had to be the one to end it all. You almost made him mortgage your mother's house. I stopped the loan. After he applied. Because that's when the bank notified me. My father turned and gripped the edge of the counter tightly. For most of my childhood, he always managed to solve problems before I even realized they existed. After my mother died, his protection turned into management. He booked my trips, screened my advisors, refused invitations, and treated any disagreement as evidence of someone influencing me. Marrying Adrian was, in a way, about escaping that control. I left a man who thought protecting himself entitled him to make decisions for me, and chose another man who thought marriage entitled him to possess me. The forms were different. The feeling of being erased was similar. Dad. I said. I called because I needed these documents. The bank and the witnesses. I didn't ask permission. He looked at me. I know. You? A long silence fell between us. Then he took a folded handkerchief from his pocket and placed it on the table between us. Your knee is bleeding again. He said. I pressed the cloth against the cut. He hadn't touched me without permission. It was a small thing. But it meant he heard more than just what I said. I should have believed you sooner. He said. I should have told you sooner. Both could be true. It was the first time in years we'd had such an honest conversation. Mara's radio crackled from the hallway. Felix's body had been found near the lower stone wall. Soaked. Exhausted. He'd hidden the blue box under his coat. He hadn't resisted. He claimed Adrian had instructed him to deliver the documents to a private courier waiting at the gas station. Police, with Lydia's consent, searched the Range Rover and found a portable document shredder, 2 empty gas cans, a bag of blank notary stamps, and a one-way ticket booked in Felix's name for the following morning. Adrian listened to the report expressionlessly. Lydia didn't. She stood up too quickly, her chair hitting the wall. You were going to burn the documents, she demanded. Adrian looked at her. You brought the shredder. For routine client processing. The gasoline is for the snowblower. In my car. You told Felix to use it. Lydia walked toward him. You said the originals would be kept by your lawyer. Please lower your voice. You sent an accountant to destroy the only document that could prove you told me the trust transfer was legal. Adrian's face turned as cold as his towards me. You're the middleman. You have the property information ready. Don't pretend you're just an innocent assistant. I trusted your statements. You slept in my house and stole my wife's jewelry. You gave me the keys. They've reached the stage of lovers becoming witnesses. Caroline separated them and asked Mara Lydia if she wanted to make a formal statement. Lydia looked at the lawyer who finally arrived to represent her. A shrewd young woman named Priya Desai. Priya spoke to her in a low voice and then asked for a private room. I rented them that little blue living room. Adrian also asked for the same privilege. Caroline directed him to the billiard room with the new lawyer. Within minutes, the house had split into isolated islands of negotiation. I returned to the library. Roland sat alone. Celeste was escorted upstairs to fetch her medication and a change of shoes. Marissa was talking quietly with her husband by the fire. Roland gestured to the chair opposite him. Can I ask you a question? I sat down. When did you find out about this affair? 4 months. About the property planning? 36 hours. He closed his eyes. 4 months. I found the hotel receipts and text messages. But you didn't say anything. I went straight to Adrian. He said I was paranoid. Roland rubbed his face with both hands. I taught him. I waited a moment. When Adrian was 15. He said. He stole money from my desk. I knew it was him. He knew I knew. But I made him pin the blame on the housekeeper because your mother-in-law was afraid of the scandal. The housekeeper was fired. Did you correct that afterwards? No. Did you compensate her? No. Then you make him understand that sacrificing someone else's life to maintain his image is acceptable. Roland looked out the dark window. I used to think protecting children meant avoiding their suffering. Me too. And for far too long. He nodded. He told me that as part of estate planning. The trust was transferring Wintermere Estate to both of your names. I wanted to believe him because I mortgaged my house for the investment. How much? 2 million. Melissa overheard. Dad. He didn't look at her. Just then, Celeste came downstairs carrying a small suitcase. She nearly dropped it when she learned the amount. You mortgaged our house. Roland's silence answered the question. That night, the Mercer family had been laughing and joking, while Adrian had left me at my door. Now they understood. He had been preparing to take their lives too. Celeste turned to her son, who was coming out of the pool hall with his lawyer. You said before that the money was secured. Adrian's lawyer tried to interrupt him, but Celeste pushed him away. You said Graham has signed on. I said the relationship with Ashford has been very helpful to this project. You showed us a letter. A preliminary letter. His signature is forged. It wasn't my work. Did you know that? Adrian stared at his mother. Celeste's voice choked. Did you know that? He answered with a question. Do you want this project to continue? That was Adrian's truest belief. If the promised return is good enough, fraud becomes courage. Celeste took a step back as if he had struck her. Lydia's lawyer emerged from the blue living room. Ms. Wall was prepared to provide a statement and allow access to her business records in exchange for written confirmation from the trust fund that no civil theft lawsuit would be brought against the items she voluntarily returned tonight. Caroline looked at me. Among the jewelry on the console table was my mother's pendant. I wanted Lydia to pay for touching it. Wear it. Put it in a file folder. Like storing grief in an inventory. But the documents she held identified every investor, every false statement, and every transfer. What else did she have? I asked. Priya replied. Email archives, call recordings, draft agreements, and a cloud folder created by Mr. Mercer. She also has information about another loan secured by his parents' property. Celeste made a sound behind us. This is extortion, Adrian's lawyer said. Priya didn't look at him. This was cooperation. I had considered the offer. I said that returning the stolen items wouldn't erase the theft. But I agree that the focus of the trust civil suit will be on the uncompensated losses. I can't control the criminal investigators, the bank, or other victims. Priya nodded. Acceptable. Lydia returned to the library. No longer with the confidence she had at dinner. She didn't apologize. I don't require remorse to recognize the value of evidence. She unlocked her phone and opened a hidden cloud account. The first file was titled Wintermere Transition. Inside was a calendar. January, complete financing. February, file for separation. March, take Victoria away from the estate to recuperate. April, private sale. Next to the March record, Adrian wrote, use care. Not hostility. Family witnesses are crucial. The anniversary party wasn't a sudden act of humiliation. This is the third step. The second document contained a draft letter from a psychiatrist Adrian had never met, describing me as emotionally unstable and unable to handle complex financial decisions. The third photo was of a prescription pill bottle in my bathroom, cropped to make ordinary sleeping pills look like evidence of drug dependence. The fourth document contained a draft statement for Celeste, Roland, Marissa, and 6 party guests to sign after the event. The statement claimed they witnessed me threatening Adrian, assaulting Lydia, and voluntarily leaving home during a mental health episode. Several of those 6 guests were still at the library. One of them started crying. Another netizen said. He asked me to sign something after dinner. He said it was an anniversary keepsake. Adrian's plan failed not because he lost his mind. His violence was part of the plan. What he didn't anticipate was the doorbell camera, the bank alarm, and the 36 hours the woman he described as weak spent arranging for the truth to arrive on time. I looked at him from across the room. You didn't kick me out because you were angry, I said. You kicked me out because you needed witnesses to prove I left. His lawyer tugged at his sleeve, warning him not to answer. Adrian answered anyway. You absolutely cannot survive a public argument. I don't need to fight. No. He said bitterly. You called your father. I met his gaze. I asked for the documents. Behind me, the printer began printing page after page from Lydia's cloud archive. The sound was soft, mechanical, and continuous. It sounded like a lock being changed. By midnight, the anniversary celebration had turned into an evidence hearing. The dining room remained as it was. Plates cooled under silver lids. Mother's chair was empty, placed at the head of the table. Snow weighed down the windows. And every few minutes, a gale violently shook the old glass, making the candles tremble. After speaking with the banking team, the guests left in batches. Some, too ashamed to make eye contact with me, avoided me. Some were eager to apologize, as if they wanted forgiveness before even understanding the damage done. Dr. Harmon grasped my hands. I smiled as he moved your seat card. He said, I'm sorry. You invested because you believed in a guarantee that didn't exist. Now please make sure you keep your records safe. That wasn't the answer. That was the only thing I could offer tonight. He nodded and left. A woman named Beth Klein filmed Adrian dragging me and transferred the original video to Caroline's secure hard drive. She admitted that Lydia had asked her earlier this week to document Victoria's inevitable breakdown as a private family record. I felt she had gone too far. I thought it was just gossip. Beth said, You're still standing near the door. Her eyes were brimming with tears. Yes. I didn't comfort her. Remorse is necessary, but it's not the same as making amends. At 12:20, local police confirmed that Felix had turned in the blue box. Inside were the original assessment report, a forged trustee certificate, a list of private investors, and a handwritten instruction from Adrian. The last line read, If stopped, state that Victoria has authorized emergency transport. Mara photographed the page and placed it in the evidence set. Adrian's lawyer forbade him to speak, but that didn't stop Adrian from watching me. Every time I moved around the house, I could feel his gaze following me. For 12 years, he had treated observation as ownership. He knew which conversations would exhaust me, which rooms I would enter when anxious, and which memories of my mother would shake my resolve. He believed that intimacy would allow him to permanently understand my bottom line. He didn't understand that boundaries could be changed. At 1 a.m., Caroline handed him the written termination notice. He was allowed 20 minutes, escorted, to collect his medication identification information and 48 hours worth of clothing. All other items would be inventoried and transferred later through his lawyer. Adrian read the first page. You evicted me without my property. You are being stripped of your trust property due to a record of violence and fraud. Caroline said. Your personal belongings remain yours. My office documents remain mine. Items unrelated to the investigation will be returned. My wine collection? It will be inventoried. The car in the east garage registered in the trust. The watch in the bedroom safe? If they are yours and legally acquired, they will be returned to you after the inventory. He looked at me. This is what you wanted. You wanted to strip me naked in front of everyone. I want you to stop using my house and my name as collateral. You could have handled this privately. You orchestrated this party to accuse me. Don't complain that it has become evidence against you. His lawyer whispered something. Adrian crumpled the notice but didn't tear it. Celeste walked up to me before leaving. Her makeup around her eyes had smudged. Without her authoritative aura, she looked like a tired woman trapped in expensive fabric. Can Roland and I stay here until the road conditions improve? She asked. Yes. South-facing rooms are available for booking. Security will escort you. You leave at 8 in the morning. Her lips parted slightly, perhaps expecting a harsh rebuke or leniency, but I received neither. Thank you, she said. Marissa and her husband opted to hire a car to leave. Before leaving, she stopped at the door. I should have stopped him. Yes. I was afraid he would turn on me. But he did anyway. He ran off with your investment. She flinched. I don't know how to resolve this. Tell the bank everything you have. She nodded and stepped into the snow. Lydia left with her lawyer after signing a property return list. She handed over jewelry, a property database, 2 locker keys, and cloud-archived access credentials. Mara didn't arrest her that night. The evidence needed to be examined. And Lydia's cooperation changed the initial assessment. She left through the front door instead of the staff entrance because I didn't need a symbolic humiliation to understand what she had done. At the door, she turned to me. He said you don't love him. Then, that's not a license. He said your marriage has been dead for a long time. That way he can freely file for divorce. He said the house will belong to him. You hope that's true. Her face turned serious. Do you think you're superior just because your family owned it first? No. I believe ownership should be based on the documents. Your actions truly reflect your character when you consider someone else to be in a weaker position. She left without answering. Adrian was the last. He came downstairs carrying a suitcase. Thomas Reed then handed over an inventory list. Adrian took off his tuxedo and put on dark trousers and the cashmere coat I gave him for his 40th birthday. The bruises on my arms had turned purple. He stopped below our wedding photo. The photo had always been too big. Adrian chose this location because the estate photographer captured the view of Lake Windermere behind us. He said it made our marriage look like history. Do you remember that day? He asked. I remember my mother was too weak to stand for the ceremony. That's not what I'm asking. I remember I once believed in you. His expression softened. In that moment, he seemed to transform into the man who used to bring coffee to my mother's hospital room and then sleep in the chair next to me. For years, I've wondered which version is real. Both. A person can show tenderness and also choose control. Good memories don't erase the hurt that follows. Telling the truth is harder than calling him a monster. Because monsters are easy to get rid of. Humans come with history, promises, apologies, and mornings that make you laugh. Adrian lowered his voice. Cancel the bank audit. Let Caroline restructure the trust fund. I'll end this relationship with Lydia. We can tell everyone the pressure led to the misunderstanding. You forged the signature. I panicked. You were going to declare me mentally unstable. That was the lawyer's strategy. You took pictures of my medication. Lydia did it. You instructed Felix to remove the original documents. I was protecting the project. You threw me into the snow. A glint flashed in his eyes. You humiliated me in my own home. It came back again. No remorse. Ownership. I stepped back from the doorway. This was never your house. He moved closer. Though Reed immediately switched back and forth between us. Adrian looked over Reed's shoulder. You'll regret letting your father go. From now on, every decision you make will be his responsibility. After I asked. My father brought the documents. You brought witnesses because you wanted to get rid of me. You think they're different? Yes. How could I get my father out of here? I turned and walked toward the hall. Dad. My father looked up from his conversation with Caroline. Come home. I said. Silence fell over the room. My father studied me. Then he buttoned his coat. Call me when you're ready. He said. No controversy. No hurt performance. He walked out with 2 teammates. He left the responsibility to the lawyers, bank clerks, and investigators. Because their work was beyond his control. Adrian watched the door close behind him. I looked back at my husband. That's the difference. He was speechless. Reed escorted him to a waiting car. Adrian didn't run to the door as the synopsis suggested. He walked slowly, trying to maintain what he considered the last shred of dignity. But before getting into the car, he looked up at the brightly lit windows of Windermere. This was the first time he'd seen the house from the outside. The car took him to a hotel that had nothing to do with my family. At 2:15 a.m., the gate closed. Mrs. Alvarez asked if I wanted the locks changed immediately. I said. Not just the locks. But every code. Static credential. Remote access token. Employee authorization. And vendor password. She nodded. Before dawn. I walked through the quiet house after the last investigator had left. The tableware was still set on the table, awaiting a celebration that never happened. Lydia's name-crossed place card lay on my mother's chair. I picked it up and tore it in half. Not out of anger, but because nothing from that performance was worth keeping. Then I took off my wet dress, cleaned the wound on my knee, and sat in the morning room until dawn. At 5:40 a.m., the first locksmith arrived. At 6:10 a.m., the digital access system deleted Adrian's profile. At 6:32 a.m., a notification appeared on my phone. Adrian Mercer's certificate had been revoked. The message was ordinary. No music. No witnesses. No convoy. This was the real end of the night. But not the end of the story. At 7:14, as the locksmith changed the last lock cylinder, an alarm went off on the trust's financial dashboard. Someone had attempted to transfer $9 million from the Aldervale escrow account to an offshore bank in the British Virgin Islands. The authorization came from Adrian's backup phone. The transfer application had been arranged before he left Windermere. And it even had my approval forged on it. The transfer failed because North Atlantic Bank had placed Aldervale's account under closer scrutiny. Failure didn't mean it was harmless. At 7:30, Daniel Zhou returned to Wintermere with 2 legal analysts and a printed copy of the transaction record. He hadn't slept all night. I don't know either. Staff were serving coffee in the break room while snowplows were clearing the driveway outside. The request entered the system at 7:14. Pre-authorization was granted at 11:58 p.m. last night, and it's scheduled to be released after the 2-factor authentication window, Daniel said. Whose credentials were used? Mr. Mercer's. And yours. I've never accessed Aldwell's account. 3 weeks ago. You were added as an emergency guarantor. He put a form in front of me. The document had an electronic signature, a copy of my driver's license, and answers to security questions that only close to me would know: the hospital where my mother died, the name of my first school, the street where I lived during college. Adrian didn't just forge my handwriting. He used our marriage as proof of identity. The target account belongs to Polaris Consulting Holdings, which is registered through an offshore service. There's nothing relevant in Lydia's cloud archive. Felix claims he's never heard of the company. Adrian's lawyer said his client won't answer any questions without a formal subpoena. I read the transfer instructions twice. Who is the beneficiary of Polaris? We don't know yet, Daniel said. The chain of ownership goes through 2 proxy directors. While we were reviewing the logs, my father called. He said, I heard about the transfer. My team can identify the account. 1 hour. North Atlantic is already tracking it. My team has better connections. Dad. I'll provide the resources. I know. Send all relevant public or legally obtained information to Caroline. Don't contact offshore banks directly. Victoria. Someone almost stole $9 million using your identity. I won't hinder the investigation just because Ashford Property Holdings acted faster. Silence. The day before, he might have taken pride in my refusal. This time he said I understand. That one word carried more weight than a grand apology. Around noon, Daniel's analyst discovered the connection. A nominated director of North Star also appeared in the company documents of a private nursing home in Switzerland. The nursing home received booking deposits from 2 guests 48 hours after the party. The names on the bookings were fake. The passport numbers were real. They belonged to Adrian and Lydia. When Caroline gave this information to Lydia's lawyer, Lydia's reaction was genuine shock. Adrian had told her they would go to Montreal after their Wintermere trip. The deal. Then she spent months arranging a development project in Vermont from Canada. She knew nothing about Switzerland. The second traveler listed on the booking wasn't Lydia, but Claire Dunning, Adrian's 27-year-old project coordinator. This affair, I discovered, wasn't the only one. Lydia sat in Caroline's office in Wintermere, staring at the booking confirmation for almost a minute. He told me Claire wasn't competent, she said. He also told you I was mentally unstable, I replied. He said she was going to be fired. He was prepared to take her out of the country. Lydia's humiliation didn't satisfy me. It revealed a pattern. Adrian didn't build partnerships. He used people as stepping stones, climbing up them and then kicking them aside. Priya Desai suggested Lydia expand the scope of the partnership. Hours later, she revealed another storage location Adrian had in Stamford, where investor gifts, backup equipment, and unsigned property documents were kept. The court authorized the seizure of the unit. Investigators found 12 luxury watches purchased through project accounts. Sealed envelopes contained cash, multiple passports, and a portable hard drive wrapped in aluminum foil. The hard drive contained internal ledgers showing that Adrian had raised nearly $27 million from friends, relatives, and private investors. Less than $6 million of this was used for legitimate planning, land selection, construction, and permits. More than $8 million was used for personal expenses, including travel, vehicles, club fees, jewelry, and payments to Lydia's brokerage firm. $9 million was reserved for offshore transfers. The remaining funds were transferred between companies to create the illusion of active development. The Vermont project wasn't entirely fabricated, which made it all the more dangerous. There were real land contracts, real architects, and real approval processes in progress. Adrian had meticulously crafted enough evidence around this scam to make any rational person doubt their intuition. The ledger also showed payments to a reputation management firm tasked with Victoria Control. The firm wrote anonymous posts portraying me as mentally unstable, drug-addicted, jealous of Adrian's success, and estranged from my father. They even forged photos of me leaving the clinic after my mother's death. captioned "Recently received psychiatric treatment." They compiled a list of journalists who might publish articles after the anniversary party. The plan was to release a statement the morning after I was taken away from Windermere Estate. If the convoy didn't arrive, an elaborately crafted version of my life would appear online. I would be portrayed as a wealthy but irrational wife, attacking her husband's business partners and fleeing her own party. Adrian would express concern. Lydia would demand privacy. Anonymous sources would say my behavior had been deteriorating for months. By the time I produced the trust documents, sensational stories had spread far more widely than legal clarifications. I asked investigators to keep every draft. Then, I did something Adrian had never anticipated. I didn't respond publicly for 3 days. Reporters were calling in droves. The video of him pushing me went viral online because it was recorded by a guest. But I only issued a statement through Caroline. The events at Windermere involve private family matters and an ongoing financial investigation. I will not argue the facts with rumors. Verified documents will be provided through appropriate legal channels. Adrian then responded with a 12-minute video recorded in his hotel suite. Sitting by the fireplace, wearing an open-necked shirt, he portrayed himself as a husband destroyed by his wife's abuse of her inherited power. He said I conspired with my father to plan the ambush out of jealousy of his successful partnership with Lydia. He claimed the shoving incident was purely accidental. He denied forging any documents. He said the presence of the convoy proved I planned to humiliate him. The video garnered hundreds of thousands of views. Commentators were divided. Some praised my courage. Others called me a billionaire's daughter destroying a self-made man. Some amateur experts analyzed my body language in the doorbell recording. Strangers judged me as abused, manipulative, aloof, spoiled, strategic, or controlling. After the first hour, I stopped watching the videos. Instead, I met with investors. We rented a civic hall for the meeting, not at Windermere Estate or our Ashford property. This choice was a result of careful consideration. I didn't want the room itself to cast doubt on my credibility. Each investor received a timeline, bank instructions, contact information for an independent lawyer, and a summary distinguishing confirmed losses from frozen funds. My father offered to compensate everyone immediately. I refused. If Ashford's funds covered the losses before the legal work was complete, Adrian would claim the investors were never harmed. I told him that might also spare those who ignored the obvious warnings from reflecting on why they trusted him in the first place. They could lose their homes. Then we set up an emergency transition fund with independent management and a repayment right linked to the recovery of assets. That would be slower. It's responsible. He studied the proposal carefully and then agreed. The transition fund would prevent foreclosure and medical hardship without extinguishing claims. The fund was funded by a temporary loan from the family foundation, overseen by an external committee, allowing investors to obtain loans based on actual need rather than social connections. Roland was eligible because his mortgage was about to default. He received assistance through the same process as everyone else. Celeste was furious. She called me privately. "You made us fill out hardship forms like strangers. You invested in a private development project without consulting me. This fund is independent. We are family. Family ties don't protect me from being evicted." She paused for a moment, then asked, "Will Adrian go to jail?" I didn't know. You did. Your father knows judges. My father doesn't contact judges. You expect me to believe you? I want you to decide whether to provide the investigators with the voicemails, emails, and statements Adrian had you sign. If I cooperate, I'll be betraying my son. If you lie, you betray everyone he cheated out of their money. She started to cry. This time, I didn't rush to rid her of the consequences of her choices. The next morning, Celeste delivered a box to Caroline's office. Inside were printed emails, drafts of false testimony, and a handwritten note Adrian had given her before the party. The note instructed her to tell the guests that she had been weak since Eleanor's death and that her father had considered treatment. At the end of the note, Adrian wrote, "Keep your tone loving. Concern is more believable than anger." Celeste attached a signed statement acknowledging her consent to the affair. This was the first time I'd seen her so candid. It didn't erase the laughter coming from outside the window. But the repair work began after the truth. Not before. A week after the party, the state anti-fraud department executed search warrants on Adeline's hotel room, office, and storage room. They seized electronic devices, financial records, forged seals, and the remaining cash. Adeline was not arrested that morning. The investigation was progressing much slower than a revenge story. Evidence had to be authenticated. Accounts had to be traced. Every defendant had to have a lawyer. Any shortcuts would cause controversy in the future. Adeline used this time to call me. The number was blocked, but I could hear the rhythm of his breathing before he spoke. Victoria. You should contact Caroline. I'm calling my wife. You're contacting witnesses. I need 5 minutes. I should have hung up, but I didn't. And instead recorded the call through the legal system Caroline had installed. And said, "Go ahead." He sounded exhausted. "Claire. She's gone." I didn't say anything. She took the money and disappeared. The transfers were frozen. She can still use another account. So tell the investigators. Do you think this is funny? No. I've lost everything. You still have a lawyer. Hotel rooms. Clothes. And the opportunity to tell the truth. You took my house. You never owned it. You keep saying that. As if the paper is more real than 12 years. The paper records the boundaries you deem inapplicable to you. We built a life there. We lived there. But you want to sell it. He breathed heavily into the phone. I love you. These words touched a part of me that hadn't yet frozen. I believe you loved me. Sometimes. I said. Then help me. Love isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. Your father has always wanted me to leave. My father didn't forge my signature. I can make up for all of this. I'll do everything I can to return what's mine. I'll acknowledge my relationship with Lydia. We can separate privately. You can keep Windermere Manor. I almost laughed out loud at his last offer. You're actually giving me my own house? I just want to keep what's left. What's left is the evidence. His voice turned cold and ruthless. If I fail, your father will suffer too. I waited. He said there were documents on the hard drive. Old Ashford's license. Payment records. Security reports. Your father covered up the problems years ago to protect the company. I copied everything. This was the leverage he'd kept all along. Compassion failed me. I said. Give the documents to the investigators. You don't know what's in there. You don't know either. Otherwise, you would have been clearer. I know enough. So stop threatening me with the truth and tell the truth. You'll ruin your own father. No. If he did something wrong, his choices will hurt him. Adrian was silent. He thought family loyalty meant concealment because that's how his family operated. He couldn't understand why I wouldn't use lies to protect my father. Just as I wouldn't use silence to protect my husband. He said. You're more ruthless than I thought. No. I'm finally consistent. I hung up and sent the recording to Caroline. Then I called my father. Adrian said he had evidence of wrongdoing by old Ashford. My father didn't deny it. What projects did he do? He wouldn't say. There was an environmental dispute in the 90s. And a contractor bribery case before you joined the company. We disclosed the findings. But I can't guarantee no one is hiding anything. Would you authorize an independent review? He hesitated. Yes. That answer changed our lives for the next year. The independent review began with a locked room and 6 boxes that hadn't been opened in 20 years. My father appointed a retired judge to oversee the review. Caroline chose an environmental lawyer with no connection to Ashford Realty Holdings. The family business gave written consent to disclose the findings to regulators and waived confidentiality of records related to public safety. There was a part of the truth in Adrian's threat. In 1998, an Ashford subsidiary purchased industrial land on the banks of a river in upstate New York. Soil tests showed that the previous owner had caused chemical contamination. A project manager delayed submitting a report while negotiating liability insurance. The delay lasted 11 weeks. During this time, construction workers entered parts of the site without full protective gear. My father didn't order the delay. He found out about it later. And he fired the executive. But he accepted a settlement that stipulated the internal timeline should be kept confidential. The company paid for the cleanup and medical monitoring. However, the workers never knew exactly when management learned of the report. Legally, the matter was resolved. But morally, it wasn't over. After the review panel released its findings, my father sat across from me in the morning room at Windermere. He looked at my mother's desk. Not at me. I told myself the cleanup was the most important thing. He said. The lawyers said that reopening the timeline would trigger claims. And the medical care wouldn't change. Do the workers have the right to know? Yes. Then why did you agree to confidentiality? Because the company is in debt. Exposure of the scandal could lead to thousands of job losses. That's the explanation. He looked at me. Not an excuse. Absolutely not. My father in the past might have defended this decision until everyone in the room gave in. But the man who left when I asked him to leave Wintermere did something else. He authorized notification of every affected worker and surviving family member. The company established a new compensation process, disclosed the delayed report to regulators, and published an internal timeline, while the board reviewed his conduct. He resigned from 2 committees. The financial losses were enormous, but the reputational damage was even greater. Before the official disclosure, Adrian posted excerpts online, hoping to create the illusion that he had exposed a secret empire. Within 48 hours, he was the whistleblower in the major media outlets. His supporters claimed the fraud was retaliation from a corrupt family. Then the full report was released, revealing that Adrian had downloaded the documents months earlier, never contacting regulators, and only using them after investigators discovered his forgeries. The truth did not absolve my father, nor did the background absolve Adrian. These 2 facts always coexist. This distinction is central to my public statement. I am not standing at the gates of Wintermere Estate, nor sitting beside my father. I am speaking at a community legal center that provides assistance to victims of financial coercion. Behind me is an ordinary blue wall. The evidence provided by my husband reveals the true flaws in my family company. He said, "This mistake is being disclosed and dealt with. It doesn't make a forged signature genuine. It doesn't turn theft into an investment. It doesn't make physical violence an accident. Accountability is not a domestic weapon. It's standard practice. And it must apply to everyone, including those I love." This statement lasted 4 minutes. It shifted public opinion by rejecting the options Adrian offered. I don't need to claim my father is flawless to prove my husband's dishonesty. I don't need to defend a company's past to defend my rights. I don't need to turn the truth into loyalty. 2 days later, Claire Dunning was arrested at Lisbon Airport. She had transferred $600,000 using a separate Alderville account and purchased a new identity package through an online intermediary. The offshore account linked to Polaris contained funds from 3 investors and payments from a property company previously used by Lydia. Claire's lawyers quickly began negotiating a partnership. Her records revealed the final layer of Adrian's plan. Wintermere Estate was not originally intended for sale. A private buyer linked to Polaris would purchase the estate for $42 million through a shell company. After the transaction was completed, a trust challenge began, and the buyer would lease the house back to another company controlled by Adrian. The proceeds from the sale would flow into a project in Vermont. There were also offshore accounts. By the time the court revoked the fraudulent transfer, the money was long gone, and the shell buyer would claim to have acted on legal documents. The proposed buyer was a fund managed by Adrian's old friend, Conrad Parker. Conrad had attended the anniversary party. He was standing by the window when Adrian pushed me down in the snow. He was also the first to raise his phone. Investigators recovered text messages showing that Conrad had filmed the incident to corroborate his claim of mental health. In return, he wanted shares in Wintermere after the sale. When questioned, he claimed he believed the transfer was legal. A draft purchase agreement included a handwritten note: "Make sure my wife is documented as mentally unstable before the transaction is completed." Months later, he and Adrian were indicted. The case escalated. The search warrant became an indictment. The indictment became a motion. Lydia cooperated with the investigation and pleaded guilty to fraud-related offenses. Felix admitted he removed and destroyed documents at Adrian's instructions. Claire returned to the United States under the agreement. Conrad denied all charges. Adrian was the most aggressive. He filed for divorce and demanded half the value of the Wintermere estate. Despite the estate being in trust, he claimed he had a 12-year management and appreciation interest and therefore a fair share. He presented photos of himself directing gardeners and roadlos, working under Roadlos and Redinier's names, selecting wines, and standing next to contractors. Our lawyers presented invoices proving the trust paid for each employee and each project. Mrs. Alvarez testified that Adrian frequently posed for photos after work was completed. A landscape architect presented an email in which Adrian asked employees to postpone planting until a magazine photographer arrived so he could take pictures with the drawings. The family rejected his property claims. He then demanded compensation for the appreciation of the estate's value during the marriage. The independent appraiser pointed out that most of the added value came from market changes and premarital repairs. The court awarded him verifiable personal property. along with limited provisional alimony during the criminal proceedings. He called the outcome theft. I called it accounting. The divorce itself didn't feel like a victory. I signed the final papers at the conference table as rain streamed down the window. Adrian appeared via video link in his lawyer's office. He was thinner, and his temples were beginning to turn gray. For 12 years, I knew his every expression intimately. Now, he was both familiar and unreachable on the screen. The judge asked if the marriage was irretrievably broken. Yes, I said. Adrian paused before answering. Yes. That was all. No band stopped playing. No executive stood. No one applauded. A marriage ended with 2 syllables and an electronic signature. Afterward, I sat in my car for 20 minutes and cried. Not because I wanted him back, but because freedom couldn't make jail time seem less real. I grieved for our once gentle mornings. For our past plans. For the children we discussed but never had. And for the part of myself that believed patience was loyalty. Then I drove home. Windermere no longer brought me the joy of victory. Instead, it weighed heavily on me. The rooms that once teemed with staff, guests, and Adrian's various events were now silent. I walked from the library to the dining room, hearing only my own, each going their own way. My mother's chair still sat at the head of the table, but I no longer sat in it. That chair carried too much legacy, expectations, and the image of Lydia raising a glass of champagne. One afternoon, Mrs. Alvarez found me covering the chair with a linen cloth. "Are you going to put it away?" she asked. I didn't know. Your mother loved that chair. She loved people more. That sentence opened a new chapter in Windermere. During the months of legal battles, I stayed at an aid center in Stamford. At first, I was just a donor, but I quickly realized that money couldn't solve everything without a robust system. Women escaping controlling marriages often need more than just emergency shelter. They needed safe accommodation, legal aid, childcare, transportation, document retrieval, financial accounts, technological security, and time to make independent decisions without surveillance. One evening, a woman named Rosa recounted her experience of sleeping in her car with her 2 children because the shelter couldn't accommodate her teenage son. "We found a place and stayed for 3 nights," she said. "Then the motel vouchers ran out. My husband canceled my credit cards and told the school I was mentally unstable." The word mentally unstable now sounded different. The image of the vacant guest room at Windermere Estate flashed through my mind. The estate had 12 bedrooms, a separate carriage house, staff apartments, a commercial kitchen, a secure gate, and excellent privacy. Residents wouldn't be photographed coming and going. The trust prohibited sale and mortgage but allowed use as charitable housing with the trustees' approval. I told my father about the idea. He didn't immediately agree. That in itself was progress. He inquired about security, zoning, staffing, privacy, insurance, administration, and whether renovating my house during the proceedings would subject residents to media attention. Every question made sense. I assembled a planning team led by shelter professionals, not family executives. We met with neighbors, domestic violence advocates, disability specialists, and former residents of the transitional program. The first proposal was rejected. It was too institutionalized. It treated women as recipients, not decision-makers. We rewrote the proposal. The second proposal created a 9-month transitional residence with private family suites and a legal office. In the former billiards room, the East Wing housed a childcare center, provided independent financial guidance, and partnered with local employers. Residents could manage their own schedules and visitors within safety protocols. No one would be asked to tell their story to donors. Any lavish dinners would not reveal their faces. The project was named Eleanor's House. Not because of my family's wealth, but because of my mother's belief, hospitality is about providing space without expecting anything in return. The trust unanimously approved the project. Renovation began 6 months after the dinner. We started by modifying the front door system. Each resident had their own access card. No spouse, guardian, donor, or staff member has the authority to revoke an access card unilaterally. Any change of access requires 2 authorized professionals and a documented security justification. The system logs every action. The second thing we renovated was the dining room. We removed the armchair at the head of the table. The walnut chair carved with roses was restored and placed in a quiet reading corner next to a photograph of my mother. The new dining room uses round tables. Each seat is not for one person. Guests may be seated at the edge to pass information. When Celeste learned of the situation at Eleanor's house, she asked to visit. I agreed to meet her before the residents moved in. She walked slowly through the renovated East Wing. Former guest rooms had become family suites with kitchenettes and lockable filing cabinets. Adrian's office, which he used to orchestrate fraudulent transfers, was now a legal advisory room. Celeste stopped. I helped him, she said. Yes. I told myself I was protecting my family. You're protecting the version of the family that gave you your status. She didn't argue. She accepted the statement. I'll testify at his trial. I heard. He will never forgive me. He doesn't need to forgive you. Because you have to take responsibility. She looked around. Can I donate? Yes. Anonymous donations will be made through an independent foundation. No room names registered. Black or any permissions. Traces of her past crimes surfaced and then disappeared. Got it. Later, she donated the proceeds from the sale of several pieces of jewelry. It wasn't to atone for her sins, but to pay for her children's childcare. Roland sold the club, the membership and the car he could no longer afford. He repaid part of his transitional fund loan after retrieving funds from his frozen Alderville account. Marissa and her husband gave full testimony and rebuilt their finances without seeking my help. My relationship with them didn't become intimate, but rather frank enough to maintain distance. Some endings are more realistic than reconciliation, and some boundaries are more merciful than pretense. Adrian's criminal trial began 14 months after the winter party. By then, most of the online attention had shifted elsewhere. It was a relief. Real cases aren't meant to be suspenseful. These included delays, scheduled meetings, motions for evidence, expert reports, and long periods of stagnation. Victims still had to wake up every morning. They still had to respond to creditors, undergo psychological treatment, change passwords, and explain to their children why familiar adults were no longer allowed near the house. The indictment charged Adrian with wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, attempted money laundering, forgery, and offenses related to an investor scheme. Conrad Parker faced multiple overlapping charges. Claire and Felix testified under a cooperation agreement. Lydia pleaded guilty and agreed to testify. The Windermere assault was handled separately. Adrian pleaded guilty to the lesser charges because the doorbell recording made the trial difficult. The court imposed conditions including a restraining order, psychological counseling, and a permanent protective order. Some criticized the sentence as too lenient. Others insisted that public humiliation was sufficient punishment. But neither perspective changed the fact that I witnessed the bruises turn from purple to yellow. In the fraud trial, the prosecution did not begin with the snow incident but with the first forged letter. A financial analyst displayed Adrian's early fundraising documents on the screen, noting that the descriptions of the Ashford guarantee became increasingly specific over time. Initially, the wording was subtle, later becoming blatant. By the final round of investment, Adrian began distributing forged guarantees, false trust certificates, and fabricated valuation reports. This gradual process was crucial. It showed that his intentions deepened with each success. Each lie that worked emboldened him. The next lie was bigger. Lydia testified for 2 days. She described the affair, the planned property listing, the investor presentations, and the pressure of being forced to publicly discuss my mental health. Adrian's lawyer attacked her credibility by listing all the benefits she hoped to gain through the partnership. She replied, I lied because I wanted the house and the money. I'm telling the truth now because he originally intended to leave the evidence to me. It's not a noble act. It sounds believable. Felix testified that if the convoy entered the property, Adrian instructed him to remove the blue box and destroy the documents. Claire admitted to arranging offshore transfers and planning to travel to Switzerland. Conrad's information linked the proposed shell company buyer to false claims of mental health. My testimony lasted all morning. The prosecutor asked about the trust, forged signatures, the anniversary party, and Adrian's use of my personal information to open financial accounts in my name. She didn't ask me to describe all the private abuse. This case doesn't need my entire marriage. It needs the facts. During cross-examination, Adrian's lawyer cautiously approached me. Mrs. Ashford, your father is a very powerful man. That's correct. He's rich and influential. He disapproves of your husband. Yes. He can mobilize lawyers, bankers, investigators, and security personnel in minutes. He made them wait so long because the bank has already identified which documents were forged. Wait for your husband to make a mistake. Wait to preserve evidence in case he takes action. You arranged a grand motorcade parade. The vehicles were chosen by my father. I obtained the documents. Did you know his arrival would embarrass Mr. In action? Mercer. I knew that in front of the people he invited to witness the false story about me. The truth would contradict his claims. The lawyer paused. You could have settled the property dispute privately. I could have terminated his residency when I discovered the bank application form. I waited because his file showed he planned to use this party and his guests as evidence of my mental instability. Several investors also planned to transfer funds the following morning. So, you allowed this conflict. I allowed the party. He showed violent tendencies. Did your claim of the house anger him? Declaring ownership does not constitute provocation. You questioned his authority in front of guests. He had no right to give my chair to his mistress. Remove me from this property. Forge my signature. Or mortgage the property. The lawyer changed tactics. Your father's company later admitted to concealing part of the environmental timeline. Correct. Yes. So, when it comes to money, the Ashford family also concealed the truth. My father's company disclosed this failed case. Compensation has been paid to the affected workers. It has been submitted for review. This does not prove the authenticity of Adrian's documents. Does your testimony indicate that your family's misconduct was unrelated to this matter? That's related to the standard I adopted. Facts are facts. Even if it's against us. The lawyer looked at the jury. He had hoped my loyalty would make me wary. Instead, my father's assessment confirmed it. Adrian never understood that holding someone accountable is not revenge against an enemy. It's a rule that always exists in romantic relationships. The jury deliberated for 3 days. They found Adrian guilty on most of the charges but acquitted him on 2 lesser conspiracy charges because the evidence was insufficient to prove his direct involvement. Conrad was also found guilty. The judge arranged sentencing after calculating the damages. At sentencing, Adrian didn't look at the jury. He looked at me. His expression contained anger, sadness, disbelief, and a certain déjà vu. For 12 years, he had believed I would protect the marriage from the consequences. At the party, he thought public pressure would force me to yield. During the investigation, he thought my father's past would make me choose to keep it a secret. All strategies relied on my silence. This verdict was the legal result of the combined efforts of many people and the Linton periphery. It wasn't just my fault. The bank analyst stopped the transfer. The guests saved the video. Lydia, Felix, and Claire provided evidence for complex reasons. Caroline established a document tracking system. Even though the network required high-speed transmission, the investigators followed established procedures. The investor admitted to being scammed. My father revealed some facts that were detrimental to him. No convoy could have achieved such a result in 10 minutes. At sentencing, the court sentenced him to imprisonment, return, and confiscation of assets related to the scheme, the recovered funds, insurance payouts, and the sale of Adrian's personal property salvaged a significant portion of the investor's losses. The bridging fund absorbed some irreparable losses. Not everyone regains their complete self. Fraud rarely ends with perfect arithmetic. Adrian was allowed to speak. He described his ambition, his fear of failure, and the pressure of living near a wealthy family whose wealth made him feel insignificant in any achievement he made. He apologized to the investors. He apologized to his parents. He apologized to his employees. He referred to my ordeal as the breakdown of our marriage. When the judge asked if he wanted to speak directly about the assault and identity theft, Adrian said, "I regret the way Victoria went through these events. Even then, responsibility was something others perceived. I did not make a victim impact statement regarding revenge. I described the consequences. I changed all the locks in the house because my husband used entry and exit as a weapon. I spent months proving my identity was mine. I saw strangers arguing about whether being pushed into the snow constituted a serious incident. I understood that control doesn't begin with a locked door. Things start when one person sees another's consent as an obstacle to be avoided. A judgment can't undo a marriage, money, or the trust he built. It can only describe what has happened and protect others from this pattern." The judge thanked me. Adrian was sentenced to a heavy sentence. I left the courthouse without waiting for the cameras. That evening, I returned to Windermere, now Eleanor's house, for the first community dinner. The residents had moved in 2 weeks earlier. Their identities were protected. So, there were no reporters, no donors, and no public speeches. The gathering included residents, staff, legal aid workers, childcare workers, and several members of an independent committee. My father attended because the board had invited him, not because he owned the room. The dining room had been completely transformed. Round tables filled the entire space. Children made paper snowflakes and stuck them on the windows. A toddler slept in a baby carrier next to his mother. 2 teenagers argued over a card game. Someone burned the first loaf of bread. And the smell amused everyone. No one sat at the head of the table. I carried a bowl of soup to the empty seat next to Rosa. Rosa's story gave me a different perspective on the house. An important day? She asked. Yes. Are you all right? I wasn't sure. It's permissible. On the other side of the room, my father was helping a little boy repair a wooden train. He lay on the carpet, looking a little uncomfortable, but happier than I'd seen him at any time in years. Mrs. Alvarez rang a small bell. Not for a speech. Dinner was getting cold. We ate. Halfway through the meal, a blizzard hit, and the lights flickered. Several residents froze. A woman instinctively reached for her phone. The backup generator started up within seconds, and the room was lit again. A staff member explained the system to everyone. Outsiders cannot shut off the power or access the control system, she said. The backup is independent. The woman's shoulders relaxed slowly. This detail meant far more than the chandelier, the legal victory, or the property value. Security often rests on ordinary systems that function perfectly well when people fear they will fail. After dinner, I went to the reading corner. My mother's walnut chair by the window was no longer just a piece of furniture. A little girl was curled up inside, reading. Her socked feet rested on a carved rose. She looked up, worried she had entered a forbidden area. May I sit here? She asked. Yes, I said. This is for reading. She continued reading. I stood beside my mother's photograph and remembered anniversary night. Lydia's hand on the chair. Adrian's fingers wrapped around my arm. Snow getting into my shoes. The convoy arriving in the darkness. 4 months. People had interpreted the arrival of those cars as a moment of power transfer. They were wrong. Power shifted when I stopped arguing with Adrian about his views on reality. It changed when I read the trust agreement, called the bank, kept the records, and accepted the fact that love cannot make fraud accidental. It changed when I asked my father for the documents instead of seeking help. It changed when I refused to conceal his failures to strengthen my argument. The situation changed when Wintermere ceased to be a symbol of male exclusivity and became a building accessible to many women. The convoy was clearly visible. What truly matters are the decisions made before and after the events. A year after the trial, I received a letter from Adrian. It was sent by his lawyer in an ordinary envelope with no return address. Caroline called first to ask if I wanted it opened, scanned, or destroyed without being read. Scan it, I said, and take the original. The letter was 6 pages long. Adrian described the daily routine at prison, the forced classes, and the strange experience of having all the doors controlled by others. He described queuing for meals, requesting to use the phone, and hearing the locks clicking shut after dark. In several passages, he came close to understanding. He wrote that he now realized how frequently he had used access as proof of authority. He admitted to deliberately moving my seat card to provoke me. He admitted to telling Lydia that the property would belong to him. He admitted to exploiting my grief, medication, and introverted nature to fabricate a story that people would believe. Then the letters changed. He said, my father's presence always made him feel insignificant. He said Wintermere Estate was alluring to him because it represented a legitimacy he could never attain. He said Lydia fueled his worst instincts. He said these investors were mature adults who should have done more due diligence. He said the sentence was too harsh. Finally, he invited me to visit him. He wanted closure. I read the letter twice. Not because I was unsure, but because I had confused interpretation with change. Adrian was able to describe his behavior accurately and still arrange every fact around himself. Even his insightful observations needed an audience. I replied with 4 sentences through Caroline. I received your letter. I acknowledge the statements contained within. I will not make visits or resume personal contact. Any future communication must concern matters required by law and must be conducted through a lawyer. I did not add that I forgave him. I did not say I hated him. They both filled a place deep within me that no longer belonged to him. The letter was kept with the case file. That winter, Eleanor's house was full. It served women from diverse backgrounds. A teacher's husband controlled all her bank passwords. A surgeon's spouse threatened to leak her private medical information. A new immigrant's documents were locked. A retired woman's adult children tried to take her home. And a college student escaped a partner who was tracking her phone. Their stories were vastly different from mine. This distinction guided the entire project. We didn't force every experience into a familiar script about a cruel husband acquiring a secret fortune and a dramatic rescue. Some women returned to their partners with security plans. Some chose divorce. Some needed legal advice regarding immigration. Some needed disability benefits. Some had money but no privacy. And some had no income at all. One resident was reluctant to talk about what happened, communicating primarily with staff through written messages. The house adapted to their lives. That was the complete opposite of control. I resumed part-time work in real estate acquisition. But not at my father's company. I joined a small community development fund that repurposed abandoned buildings into affordable housing and local commercial spaces. My surname still opened doors of opportunity for me. Therefore, I disclosed the relationship and proactively avoided situations involving family interests. In the kind of job I want, every decision must be scrutinized, not just have authority. During the environmental remediation process, my father continued as chairman before announcing his planned retirement. He didn't see it as a sacrifice. He said the company needed leadership free from the loyalty networks of his generation. At his final annual meeting, he invited one of the affected workers to speak. The man described headaches, fear, and anger at learning that executives had access to the information he had been deprived of. My father sat in the front row listening. He didn't explain the market pressures or the reasons for keeping his job. After the man finished, my father stood up and apologized to him unconditionally. Later in the car, he said, "I've been waiting to feel less ashamed after doing the right thing. You know? Maybe shame isn't a reward. It provides information." He had considered that. "You talk like your mother." This time, I didn't feel like I was inheriting another role. As part of an approved volunteer program, Celeste visits Eleanor House twice a year. She sorts donated clothing and prepares welcome baskets under the supervision of staff. She never meets with residents unless they choose to participate in group activities. At first, she tried adding luxuries and handwritten cards with her name on them. The project coordinator removed both. Gifts shouldn't create obligations, the coordinator explained. Celeste accepted the correction. One afternoon, she found me in the greenhouse. "Adrian writes to me every week," she said. "I thought he would. He says I testified against him. What do you think? I betrayed him long ago because I made him understand that consequences are negotiable." We worked silently for a few minutes. Then she asked, "Do you think he can change?" "I think he can choose to behave differently. But I don't know if he will." "Do you think I can change?" "When you accept limitations without demanding credit." "You already are." She smiled faintly. "Sounds like your mother." Everyone says that whenever I tell someone something inconvenient. We both laughed. Surprised even ourselves. Our relationship didn't develop into a mother-daughter one. Two women bound together by pain tried to avoid repeating the same mistakes. Roland moved into a small house after selling his mortgaged property. He had volunteered for a financial literacy program for retirees, using his own experience to illustrate how status and trust could overcome suspicion. He never portrayed himself as a victim, nor did he shy away from mentioning his choices. Marissa slowly rebuilt her home. She and her husband separated for several months, received counseling, and later reconciled under a new financial agreement. She texted me on the anniversary of the reunion, "I'm sorry I laughed. I was afraid of being the next target. So I chose to stay near the person who hurt you for safety. I understand that fear can explain my behavior. But that is no excuse for laughing." I kept the message because it was specific. Specific apologies carry weight. Vague apologies drift toward the person who caused the harm. The biggest challenge facing Eleanor's house didn't come from Adrian's lawyer, nor from hostile neighbors. It came from a resident at our first independent audit meeting. Her name was Keisha. She had run a restaurant before her husband emptied their accounts and convinced friends that she was mentally unstable and unable to work. She studied our governance chart closely, pointed to the clause in the trust powers appointing 2 board members, and asked, "What will stop your family from turning this place back into your home once you're tired of us?" No one in the room answered quickly. The documents were legal. The professionals were respected. The scheme's intentions were good. But its structure still required residents to trust that the Ashford family would continue to be benevolent. Keisha's question exposed her weakness. We amended the bylaws. Former residents gained permanent elected seats on the council. Representatives of the trust could not serve as chair of the grievance committee. Scheme rules affecting privacy, access, or length of stay required consultation with residents. An outside organization was authorized to investigate complaints against me, my father, or anyone connected to the property. My father didn't like giving up so much control. So did Adrian. I told him. He signed the amendment. Keisha later became the first former resident board chair. In their first meeting, she rejected a donor's offer to film a holiday dinner inside the house. The donor threatened to withdraw a large donation. Keisha said, the donations were for purchasing access, not for ensuring security. The money disappeared. The project was preserved. Watching her make that decision, I learned something Adrian never learned from any trust agreement. Administrative responsibility doesn't depend on having final say. Sometimes, we can demonstrate this by building a structure where even those with less financial means can say no without their own safety being threatened afterwards. On the 2-year anniversary of the night I was locked out. It started snowing shortly before dinner. No formal events were held. Eleanor House had arranged a movie night. Children brought blankets into the library. Staff made popcorn. A resident named Jasmine was preparing to move into her apartment the next morning. And everyone signed in. I went outside alone. My heel hit the stone where the steps had been repaired. The fountain was covered for winter. Tire tracks from ordinary vehicles crossed the driveway for employee vehicles. Grocery deliveries. A resident going home from get off work. I stood where I had fallen. The cold felt different because I could easily step into the cold. Through the window, I saw figures and light. No one outside was laughing at the woman. A child waved to me when he noticed me. I waved back. My phone vibrated. It was a message from the evening coordinator. The movie was starting. Would you like to come in? I typed yes. Before I even reached the door, it opened from the inside. Jasmine held it for me. In that instant, old memories flooded back. And Adrian stood on the threshold. Snow was falling in the hall. Lydia called from my mother's chair. Then, things took its place. Jasmine was wearing slippers. A toddler clung tightly to her leg. The warm air smelled of popcorn. You'll freeze to death, she said. I'm here. In the library. The old walnut chair still sat beside the bookshelf. Unclaimed that night. I sat on the carpet with the others. The movie was a comedy. Half the children talked the whole time. The projector malfunctioned once and needed to be restarted. Someone spilled juice. The night wasn't perfect. Ordinary and safe. This was the part Adrian couldn't grasp about ownership. He thought owning property meant having the right to decide who was the homeowner. My mother thought fulfilling the duties of a steward meant enabling people to integrate into the community without depriving anyone of their freedom. For years, I'd let Adrian's definition dominate my life because it sounded louder. The trust documents proved legal ownership. Life at Eleanor's house proved its significance. I still receive messages from strangers who saw the doorbell recording. Many people ask me why I remained calm. Why I didn't fight Adrian in the restaurant. Why I waited for the convoy to arrive. Or, why I didn't arrest him immediately. The answers are far less dramatic than they imagine. I wasn't calm all the time. I was afraid for months. I doubted my memory, downplayed the evidence, and delayed making decisions because the person who hurt me also knew my past. On the steps, I didn't resist because the plan depended on maintaining the status quo. And fighting a stronger person on ice might have hurt me more. The convoy was disbanded because the fraud had been reported. Legal proceedings take time because a justice system built on appeals can't function like announcing a verdict at a party. The visible spectacle lasted 10 minutes. The exit process took years. Anyone would be drawn to a black car pulling into the driveway. I now focus more on less conspicuous account openings that only you can control. Copy documents. Tell someone you trust. Meet with an independent lawyer. Change the password. Record the date. Or believe that embarrassment is no more dangerous than silence. Not everyone has a father with a lawyer on call at all times. Everyone should have a system that requires no outside intervention. This belief affected Eleanor House far more than my story. The project was managed by professionals and former residents. It published audited financial data. It limited the influence of donors. It had a complaint handling process independent of the trust. I couldn't evict a resident just because I didn't like their choice. My father couldn't turn the house into a propaganda venue. No board member had the authority to unilaterally revoke access. We had our own defenses. This was perhaps the most honest form of power. A small brass plaque hung on the wall near the front entrance. It didn't have my name, my father's name, or Adrian's name. It read, "No one should have to give up their dignity to obtain a home." Below it was a narrow table where residents could place keys, mail, and gloves. A photograph of my mother sat there in a simple frame. She was smiling at something outside the frame. Sometimes I fantasized about telling her everything. I would tell her that I kept the house, but changed the rules. I would tell her that the carved chair is now used to read a book, not a will. I would tell her that my father finally learned to leave when asked to. I would tell her that I no longer mistake patience for love. I would tell her that the night Adrian let another woman sit in his seat, trying to erase me from my own life story. That night he locked me out because he believed possession required trust, witnesses, and the key in his possession. By morning, his identification was gone. By the following winter, the room he used to plan my move was in the possession of lawyers who helped other women preserve their names, homes, documents, and choices. He locked me out of his own home. By daybreak, he couldn't find the key. This story is profoundly educational, concerning personal dignity, financial responsibility, and the importance of protecting one's legal rights. Through Victoria's experience, the audience learns that marriage, family status, or long-term residence do not grant anyone the right to control another's property, identity, or decisions. Ownership must be established through legal documents, and trusts can never replace proper verification when it comes to houses, investments, or personal assets. This story also illustrates how emotional abuse and financial fraud can gradually develop. Adrian didn't initially steal the inheritance blatantly. He first belittled Victoria's experience, misrepresented her professional abilities, kept her out of important decision-making, and made others believe she was mentally unstable. This reminds viewers that manipulation often begins with small, disrespectful acts that gradually escalate into coercion, forgery, financial exploitation, and physical violence. Most importantly, Victoria didn't retaliate uncontrollably. She preserved evidence, consulted legal and financial professionals, protected innocent investors, and allowed accountability to be determined through a responsible process. Her actions demonstrate that true power isn't measured by public humiliation or the power of inheritance. It lies in clear boundaries, verified facts, lawful actions, and the courage to stop shielding others from the consequences of their own choices.